On the morning of April 12, 2018, 27-year-old Renita Williams of Shreveport, Louisiana was at home, minding her own business. She lived at home with her mother, Anita, and had just broken up with her long-term boyfriend, Jonathan Robinson. Like many relationships, the breakup had been a messy one, and a great deal of drama had unfolded on social media websites, mainly the most popular of them, Facebook. Apparently, Jonathan had moved on rather quickly from Renita and had recently started dating a woman from Houston, Texas named Sharika Taylor. And although it's not entirely clear what the ins and outs of the social media drama were, there had definitely been some exchange between the two women that had seriously enraged Jonathan Robinson. As foolish as it often is, men sometimes attempt to defend the honor of the women in their lives, but no one could have expected Jonathan to take such extreme measures in what amounted to little more than an exchange of harsh words. Because before Jonathan pulled up to Renita's place on the morning of April 12th, he had just driven by his aunt's house to retrieve something he'd previously hidden in the basement of her home, a high-caliber, semi-automatic rifle. He was so delirious with anger that he didn't even bother to turn off the engine of the vehicle he'd driven up in. He simply grabbed the rifle from the passenger seat, kicked in the dead-bolted front door to the house, and then started shooting. It seems those first few shots were merely to terrify those in the home, because no one was actually hurt during the first few minutes of the attack. Whilst her mother and younger brother escaped from the rear of the home, Jonathan quickly located a terrified Renita, who believed she was about to be immediately executed. But apparently her ex-boyfriend had other plans for her first. Keeping her at gunpoint, he told her to grab her cell phone and begin a Facebook Live broadcast. At first, Renita had no idea why she would need to do something like that, but all slowly became clear when Jonathan began to demand she apologize to Taylor, his new girlfriend. In a terrifying public display of humiliation, Jonathan could be seen pointing the barrel of his rifle at the mother of three's head while he made her apologize over and over again for the perceived offense. She was terrified, voice quivering as she complied. Meanwhile, Renita's mother was hiding in the backyard, having had the foresight to grab her cell phone before fleeing from the gunshots. With shaking hands, she hammered 911 onto her phone's touchscreen, then begged the dispatcher to send help in a hushed but terrified tone. Yet the police were far closer than she could have imagined, because Officer Brittany Mackey was actually within earshot of the gunfire. As soon as she heard the shots, she rolled up to St. Vincent Avenue at Natalie Street and got out of her vehicle with her pistol drawn. Jonathan Robinson looked up to see the cops arrive mere minutes after he'd burst into the home, and he was seething with rage. He immediately executed Renita as she kneeled on the floor below him, then walked out of the busted front door and began shooting at Officer Mackey. Using trees and parked vehicles as cover, Jonathan sent round after round of high-caliber rifle fire into the officer's patrol car, forcing her into cover. Mackey immediately got onto her radio and began calling in backup, with her colleagues actually hearing the sound of gunfire over the airwaves. She then got as low behind the back wheel of her patrol car as she possibly could, and prayed for swift reinforcements. Just 2 minutes later, that backup arrived in the form of Corporals Joshua Pettigrew and Greg Walker. They screeched up the street, coming to a stop just short of Officer Mackey's patrol car. The officers then jumped out of the vehicle, took cover behind the open doors, and sent a torrent of .45 caliber pistol bullets at Jonathan's firing position. The overwhelming firepower pushed him back into the house, and the two corporals lost track of their target. The next two cops on the scene were two special response team members, Corporals Landry Ducto and Michael Gerbine. The pair took off running for the other side of the street, but Jonathan opened fire once again, this time from a vantage point on the second floor of the house he was occupying. The air around them cracked and whizzed with .7.62 bullets, ricocheting off the concrete as they narrowly missed their targets, but luckily, neither officer was wounded. He's in a sniper position, another officer can be heard screaming on a police cruiser's dash cam. Get down. Robinson had the supreme advantage of a concealed elevated position coupled with high-caliber weaponry, and for almost an hour, he kept every officer pinned down and unable to approach his position. They were so heavily outgunned that the only 2 shots that managed to fire were to disable the car Robinson left running in the driveway when he barged into the Williams home. Plus, the police had no idea where he was even shooting from and couldn't risk civilian casualties by peppering the entire home with bullets. To the officers pinned down at the scene, waiting for a full special response team to arrive seemed like an eternity. Eventually, a full police SWAT team was pushing up towards the house, preparing to breach and clear the entire structure to locate and eliminate the active shooter. Yet just as the team was cleared to breach, Jonathan indicates to those on scene that he wished to surrender. They hesitated and fell right into his trap. He opened fire on them first and sent a bullet smashing through SRT operative Robert Entrikin's right wrist. "I've been hit," Entrikin cried over his radio. "Officer hit." Another torrent of bullets are exchanged for a few moments before a sudden lull in the volume of fire. Then, to the surprise of the attending officers, Jonathan appeared to walk out of the busted front door again. Only this time, he was unarmed, and he proceeded to lie down on the front lawn of the house in a show of surrender. The SR team rushed in, putting cuffs on the shooter before dragging him away. Renita's mother and brother are led away from the scene safely, but heartbreakingly, Renita had succumbed to her wounds before the EMTs could get to her. At his murder trial, Jonathan Robinson pled guilty to first-degree murder and admitted to investigators that he fired on police officers because he wanted to die. He narrowly escaped the death penalty by agreeing to a plea deal presented to him by prosecutors and was later sentenced to life in prison. 100 years ago, a person would have to drag another into a busy street to perform a public execution. But nowadays, all it takes is a few button clicks on a cell phone to have all your family and friends watching as you're executed in cold blood by some deranged killer. And such incidents can happen so fast that there's simply no way of preemptively or actively censoring them, no matter how hard Facebook might try. As long as there's a technology available that allows us to share all the intimate details of our lives, humanity seems to relish in sharing not just the good and positive, but also the darker, more terrifying things too.
About 4 months ago, we moved into a new house out in the country. Since we previously lived in an apartment, that means that we needed to buy a new lawnmower. Instead of putting out $200 on a brand new lawnmower when we'd probably just have to move again in a couple of years, we decided instead to hire someone to cut our grass for us. We initially went with a guy that my fiance used to work with, but $65 every 2 weeks, well, starts to add up, and I was really looking for something cheaper. That brings me to Charles. Charles had posted in my Facebook classified that he was looking for some lawns that he could cut this weekend, and he had a reputable company, or so I thought. So I decided to send him a message on Facebook. Now, initially, Charles came off as pretty nice to me. He asked me for my address so that he could stop by and give me an estimate. After stopping by my house, he sent me a message that said,
"Damn, sweetheart, you got a big-ass porch."
It made me kind of uncomfortable, but I figured I was just overreacting, and I started planning when he could come out. I told him the days that I was off from work, but he assured me that I didn't have to be there when he would do the work. I told him the best time would probably be on a Wednesday. Wednesday morning, he messaged me.
"Are you home?"
I said no. 3 hours later.
"Are you home yet?"
I told him no yet again and that I won't be home until after 8. Charles then informed me that his tire had a flat and he would come tomorrow instead. Let's cut to Thursday, and first thing in the morning, he sends me a message.
"Will you be home today?"
I told him no. He messages me back a few hours later once again asking if I'm home. I told him, "No, I told you I wouldn't be home all day. Are you still coming out?" Then he tells me his truck broke down. He was sending me messages like,
"Please don't be upset with me, sweetheart."
At this point, I was getting really creeped out and pretty sick of his excuses, but I told him to just come tomorrow. It's now Friday and it's actually my day off, but I woke up and I left the house for the day. He messages me.
Hey, I'm coming. You're off today, right?
I told him yes, but that I wouldn't be home.
When will you be home then?
I told him I didn't know, and he messages me later saying,
Sorry, babe. I was loading the equipment onto my truck and it then fell and broke. Maybe I can come tomorrow.
At this point, I was really creeped out, and I just told him never mind and that I was going to find someone else at this point. It's now Saturday, and I get off work around 4 or 5, and I check my phone, and I find multiple messages from him saying that he cut my grass and that I need to come home and give him the money. I told him no, and that I would just send it through Cash App. He started getting really irate with me and saying that I needed to give him the money right now. I told him that I would give him the money once I got home and actually saw that the grass was cut for myself. I'm not gonna lie, I was honestly really worried that he was gonna be waiting at my house for me, so I decided to get a friend of mine to drive home right behind me. Luckily, he wasn't there. I sent him the money and I thought that was the end of it. Fast forward 2 months later. I'm on the phone with my fiance as I drive to class, and he tells me that he has to get off the phone because there's somebody walking down our driveway. I asked him what he meant, and he said that there was some strange man walking around in our driveway as well as our front yard. After I got to class, he sent me a text telling me that it was some man who was just trying to promote his lawn business. Now, I didn't really think too much about this as it had been 2 months. But later that night, I then got home and I saw a business card that was laying on my counter, and it had the same exact name of the very same man who had been messaging me previously. I decided to call my fiance at work, and I asked how the guy had been acting. He said that Charles seemed genuinely surprised that a man had come out, and he asked if he lived alone. I then asked Mike if Charles had stopped at any of the other houses in the neighborhood, and then he replied with, "You know, now that I think about it, no. After he left our house, he just left." Mike said that Charles seemed really desperate to help around the house, and he actually offered to cut the lawn, fix our porch, as well as remove any trash or scrap metal we had around the house. And then he even asked if we had pests, such as bats in our attic or anything. That especially really freaked me out, as we do have a bat problem, and I had previously posted about it on Facebook. So I'm guessing that's where he figured that out. Mike then said that what was really weird about Charles is how freaked out he was acting about the dog. He had heard our dog Max barking from inside and then started asking a lot of questions like,
Is he big? Does he stay inside or outside? Does he ever go outside or does he just always stay inside? How big is he? Is he nice?
Mike just chalked it up to him being scared of dogs. He gave him a brief tour of the outside of our house, and then Charles got in his truck and then left. That's when I told Mike that this was the same guy who had been messaging me earlier in the year, and then Mike began to really freak out. He said that Charles had asked a lot of really specific questions about who all lived here and how long they lived here, as well as where they specifically were at the time. He said that he tried to brush them off, but Charles seemed really insistent to know if Mike was the only one in the house. Before he left though, Mike specifically asked him if he had cut the lawn here before, and that maybe he was thinking of the last owners, but Charles just told him,
No, I've never cut your grass before. I just happened to be out this way and thought I'd promote my business.
The worst part? On that day, I had taken my fiance's car to work that day, which means that mine was in the driveway when Charles stopped by, meaning that he thought I was home alone when he stopped by. I didn't contact the police because I thought that I just might be overreacting about it. This all happened about 2 days ago, but hopefully I don't hear from him again. If I do, however, I'll definitely give an update.
Stephen Nicholson's arrest as the main suspect in a violent, indecent assault and murder sparked off one of the UK's biggest evidence searches, which involved a trawl of thousands of hours of CCTV footage. He was the prime suspect in the murder of Lucy McHugh, and actually rented a room in her parents' home at the time of her murder. At one point, it looked like the British police might actually have to let him go due to lack of evidence, but in the end, it was a Facebook password that proved to be his ultimate undoing. After he was arrested, the police had just 96 hours to charge him with the murder, or he would have to be released. And given that it would take 4 weeks to get a key piece of DNA evidence analyzed and sent back to them, the clock was ticking to find something concrete that they could use to charge him with murder. The police subjected Stephen to vigorous questioning and managed to get him to admit that Lucy had sent him a Facebook message on the night before she was killed. When pressed as to what that message said, he said she told him she was pregnant with his child. He intended this to be evidence that it couldn't possibly have been him that killed her, but when police asked him to hand over his Facebook password so that they could verify his claims, he refused to give it to them. This was his one big mistake. When asked why he refused to share the password with them, Stephen told officers that he was involved quite heavily with some narcotics dealers around his hometown, and that revealing his messages would compromise them, possibly even causing them to take reprisals against him. But this didn't wash with investigating officers, who became convinced that the information contained within the account could be used against him. It also presented them with a marvelous opportunity. There were 2 options available to them, one being to seek the compliance of U.S. federal courts to get Facebook to hand over Stephen's passwords to them, but that would have taken way longer than just 96 hours, and by that time Stephen would be freed. But the other was to make use of some terrorism legislation, what is known as Section 53 of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, colloquially called RIPA among police officers. This means that anyone who seeks to withhold information, such as computer passwords, during a serious crime investigation can basically be charged with obstruction of justice. Right when it looked like Stephen was going to be bailed, he was rearrested, and after pleading guilty to withholding evidence at Southampton Crown Court, he was jailed for 14 months. With that, the police managed to buy themselves more time to find evidence of his involvement in Lucy McHugh's murder. However, while there was plenty of circumstantial evidence that Stephen had killed Lucy, there was nothing to physically link the spot where Lucy's body was found at Nicholson. Whatever weapon he used to kill her remained unaccounted for, and police officers were unable to find any of his DNA at the scene. Once again, investigators were forced to focus on Stephen's so-called online footprint, this time seeking help from an experienced cloud data analyst to try to link Stephen to the scene of the crime. A cloud data analyst's job is to study various pieces of digital information sent from Nicholson's phone to data servers, which are owned by companies such as Google and Facebook. While tracing the phone's route on the day of Lucy's murder, the analyst happened to notice a small blip in an area of Southampton that the police had not yet searched. It suggested that Nicholson had, for whatever reason, deviated from his most direct route home. The diversion took him to a place known as Tanner's Brook, a stream which meanders through Southampton, weaving its way through some pretty dense woodland in the western portion of the city. Detective Superintendent Paul Barton later said to journalists, "With the help of the analyst, what we discovered was a slight deviation on his telephone, which didn't match the story he'd given us. You could say it had jumped a mast, so to speak, and therefore put Stephen at the place where we discovered some bloody, discarded clothing. It was a great bit of work from the analyst who pointed it out." The subtle shift in the narrative given by the killer was enough for police to launch one of the largest ever fingertip searches, which involved almost 200 officers from 12 other police forces. By that point, it had been 4 weeks since Lucy's dead body was found, but on the first day of the search, police got the exact kind of breakthrough that they had been hoping for. They found a discarded plastic bag containing a blue bloodstained hoodie, along with a number of other items that were described in court as Nicholson's murder kit. The blue hoodie contained Nicholson's DNA, as well as Lucy's blood, with Stephen being thought to have dumped the clothing, some of which had been partially burnt, near the brook after getting changed on his return from the murder scene on July 25th. Prior to the discovery of the clothing, police had no other direct evidence of Nichols' involvement in her killing. They had tested fibers from every bloodstained jacket and Stephen's clothes, which suggested direct contact with the hoodie, but that simply wasn't enough to actually charge him with a crime. Homicide detectives had already established that hoodies of the same type were sold to 2 people in the Southampton area, and that one of them was given a present to a man who knew a friend of Stephen's. The DNA evidence was the final nail in the coffin for Nicholson, according to Detective Superintendent Barton. During the course of the investigation, police officers had studied 11,000 hours of CCTV footage, examined over 2,000 pieces of physical evidence, and taken more than 300 written reports. A Herculean amount of work had given them a strong circumstantial case, but in the end, genetic evidence was what the police really needed to prove that Stephen was Lucy's killer. But had Stephen not been jailed over refusing to hand over his Facebook password, the outcome could have been very, very different. The 14-month jail sentence not only bought the police a great deal of time, but it also potentially stopped Stephen from going back to Tanner's Brook to move the evidence he had dumped there. And it's frankly astounding that the killer of a child might well be walking the streets right now if it wasn't for something as simple as a Facebook password. Public prosecutors were eventually granted access to Stephen's Facebook account on the first day of his murder trial, but found that he had deleted most of his messages before he was arrested. As it turned out, it didn't matter in the least bit if Stephen gave them the password. He still wouldn't be able to be charged based on the absence of the messages. If he'd only gone and given police the password, he might still be free to walk the streets. One of the prosecutors, a Mr. Montague, criticized the protracted process, saying that for him, the personal side, the human side, is we have a 13-year-old child that has been murdered under ferocious circumstances. And for me, it's somewhat frustrating that Facebook seems so unwilling to help with our investigation by recovering deleted messages. Facebook said it had worked closely with the investigating officers, but that they agree that this legal process can be far too slow. We have actively lobbied for reforms to EU, US, and UK laws to allow us and others to directly and more quickly provide information to UK law enforcement authorities, a spokeswoman for the company said. But despite the slow process, police have been able to build a case against an extremely narcissistic, self-centered, violent predator who had torn apart a family kind enough to put a roof over his head when they could have easily turned him away. He preyed on their underage daughter, and when it looked like she might actually tell on him, he killed her. But at no point could he have expected that something as seemingly insignificant as his Facebook password would actually be the thing to put him behind bars.
So this happened a few weeks back. As I'm sure most of you know, Facebook now has a dating component to it. I matched with this guy who seemed pretty chill to me. He was older than me. His profile had stated that he was 27 years old and I had just turned 23. But in my mind, 4 years age difference really isn't that big of a deal. We talked for about a day or two and decided that we would meet up for a drink to try and get a feel for each other in person. When we met face to face, he looked a little older than just 27. He had quite a bit of gray mixed into his facial hair, but I figured he might just be one of those people whose hair turns gray earlier in life. No big deal. We have a few drinks and then we chatted for a bit. He again states that he's 27 years old. He was really nice, but he wouldn't stop staring at me and feeding me compliments with every single sentence that came out of his mouth. I'm really awkward and I'm honestly pretty average looking. I was really flattered that he was saying those things to me, but naturally, it made me uncomfortable. Shortly after that, I decided it was time for me to head out, since I had to be up for work around 4:30 a.m. the next day. He walked me to my car and then we started discussing his car. It really caught my attention due to the fact that it was a 1970 Camaro. Then out of nowhere, he offered to take me a drive in it around 10 p.m. I declined due to the time and to the fact that I had only known this guy for less than 2 hours, and he wants me to get in his car and go on a random drive late at night? Yeah, that definitely wasn't going to happen. Something I really enjoy is watching documentaries about serial killers as well as reading creepy encounters and let's not meet stories. The last thing I'm about to do is get into a vehicle with an unfamiliar man who's then going to take me to God knows where. I know what kind of danger that can lead to, and I wasn't going to risk it. He was very persistent about it, but I wouldn't budge. So I just got in my car and left for my drive home, which was about 45 minutes long. By the time I arrived home, I received a ton of messages from him, most of them saying how much he already missed me, wants to build a future with me, and how he's never fallen for anyone this fast during his 38 years of life, then continuing with further compliments. And that's when my stomach then dropped. He had just stated that he was 38 years old. That's not what I was told at the bar or what his profile said. I replied to him, wondering whether or not it bothered him that he was 15 years older than I was, and I know it bothered me for damn sure. He states that it didn't, and he prefers to date younger women around my age. I didn't respond, and I just went to bed after that. When I woke up the next morning, I had multiple text messages and 5 missed calls and voicemails from that guy. I'm not going to lie, I straight up ghosted him after that. I blocked him on every form of social media that I had, as well as his phone number, which I guess is a crappy thing to do on my part, but he really creeped me out. He was super charming, but he was way too pushy, and he was giving me some real Ted Bundy vibes. So shout out to Facebook. I really want to thank you for introducing me to the creepiest person I've ever gone on a date with. So yeah, I think that's the last time I'll use Facebook for a date.